Hi, everybody. I'm Rebecca Flick, Chief External Affairs Officer for Resolve, the National Infertility Association. Welcome to Resolve's Kitchen Tables Conversations. This is a nod to our founding around Barbara Eck's kitchen table in 1974. We're bringing experts and patients' voices together to discuss important topics. The topic on today's table for this kitchen table conversation, we want to have a casual conversation about endometriosis, its symptoms, what patients experience, and how they advocate and find community, whether it's for your care or an integral part of your journey. Our head of table sponsor for our kitchen table series is Sumitomo Pharma. Their mission is to improve healthcare and contribute to society by creating new values based on research and development. We thank them for their sponsorship. For those that don't know, endometriosis is a chronic medical condition impacting 1 in 10 women, where tissues similar to the lining of the uterus grows outside the uterus. This can lead to pain, inflammation, and scar tissue formation. Endometriosis affects millions of individuals worldwide, primarily those of reproductive age, and can cause severe pain, fertility issues, and other complications. It's also, as you're going to hear today, difficult to diagnose. So I want to start with our amazing panel to introduce themselves. These are two wonderful women, friends of Resolve, and they're taking their time to speak with us today, and we're so happy to have you both here. April, we'll start with you. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you so much, Rebecca and Resolve, for this opportunity. I appreciate it. So my name is April. I started my menstrual cycle when I was 9 years old. So I was in the 3rd grade, just still trying to navigate what life looked like as a kid, but also still trying to navigate what it meant to have a menstrual cycle that young. As I got older into my preteens and as a teenager, I dealt with a lot of nausea, heavy bleeding. I had cramps, but not as much, but my leg pain was really, really bad to the point where I couldn't walk. It was really hard to be able to decipher what was really going on with me. My parents was very hands-on, and they decided to start taking me to a doctor. And the physician just wanted to make sure that I did not have any DVTs or possibly pulmonary embolism. So I kept going every 6 months for them to check my blood to make sure that the circulation was running right with Dopplers. Thankfully, all of that was good and it was positive, but I was still having really, really bad cramps and leg pains, nauseous all the time. The over-the-counter medication wasn't working. So then my doctor then recommended me to go to a pediatric GYN. So I was under the care of a pediatric GYN, and they put me on oral contraceptives. That worked for a little bit, and then I started getting breakthrough bleeding with that. Then they switched me about 2 more other times, and in between all 3 of those different oral contraceptives over years, still breakthrough bleeding. I was like, something has to be wrong. So by the time I got into my 20s and I was working in the medical field, one of my doctors was the OBGYN, and she was like, I think you have endometriosis. So I started researching what that looked like, what that meant. I didn't even know how to spell it. I've never heard of it before. When I finally went and got the exploratory laparoscopy in my late 20s, I was officially diagnosed with stage 4 endometriosis. So from the time I was 9 years old until my late 20s, I was just trying to navigate and understand how to cope with the pain until finally I was diagnosed with endometriosis in my 20s. 10 months later after that, after having an ablation surgery, which I now know is called an ablation surgery, I had breakthrough bleeding again. They wanted to put me on medication. I was leery about that because I already knew what oral contraceptives did, and it wasn't very successful for my condition. Found an excision specialist. That's when I really knew that there was a difference between ablation and excision. I got excised. The surgery was 7 hours long. My endometriosis had spread to my bowels. It was everything was completely glued together by the endometrial tissue. And that was my second and final surgery 10 months after my last one. So it's been about a decade. Yeah, 11 years since my last excision surgery. So I mean, like, it's been, do I still have pain? Yes. Am I still nauseous? Yes, because I went undiagnosed for so long that sometimes with the disease, it's unfortunate that you still have to deal with those symptoms. but the rate and the intensity of how I felt it before is definitely different.
Well, thank you for sharing. I'm so sorry it took so long, but I'm glad you have a little bit of relief. And I think we'll probably want to expand a little bit on quality of life as we move forward in the conversation. Diana, welcome.
Hey, thank you so much for being here. And it's so wonderful to be part of this community and to hear voices like April, who I have been watching her journey for a long time now. And I do feel that there's so much support among all of us that are in the infertility community and the endometriosis community. And I fall into both. I am an EndoFound ambassador and a journalist, and I suffer from endometriosis. I have a similar thread with April in that I was 11 years old when I got my first menstrual cycle. And I always had very heavy, very long periods that would be irregular. So every 2 weeks, nausea, sometimes low grade temperatures, ovarian cyst ruptures that would put me in the hospital, but was given an oral contraceptive and told that some women, this is years ago, that some women deal with bad periods, and I was one of the unlucky ones. And my mom never knew about endometriosis, and she did her best to advocate for me. And cut to 32 years old, being very, very sick, while I was at work, and thinking, okay, this is at a fevered pitch of pain. I'm unable to move. It hurts so bad. I'm so sick. Went to the ER in New York City, and they chalked it up and said, like, oh, you probably have a hormonal imbalance or the flu. And like, this is not a flu. This is not a hormonal imbalance. When they said, go see your gynecologist, I'm like, I'm in this big fancy hospital and you're telling me there's not a single like gynecological specialist here. And they sent me on my way as if I was a crazy person. So I went to my gynecologist I saw once a year. She's like, you look so sick. Asked me a bunch of questions, also said I could have a virus, also said I could have a hormonal imbalance. Finally, one of my girlfriends was like, please advocate for yourself. Like, you have to find an answer. This is unusual. So I eventually found a specialist who listened to me, who heard me, and had a very high suspicion I had endometriosis, but said, you know what, like, I want you to go get an anti-Mullerian hormone test, simple blood test lab. And that lab came back at 32 years old that I had infertility, not, not being sterile, but infertility at a very, very low rate, where she said, you will most likely need to have assistance with getting pregnant if that's a goal of yours.
I feel like the common thread you both had in a positive way is that you had parents advocating for you and, saying, okay, something is wrong. Let's go get you help and figure this out. And it kind of feels like the unfortunate common thread is that the right healthcare providers, weren't there. So, we hear a lot of stories that resolve from endometriosis patients, and it's all too common. And so I would love, Diana, if you could tell us, you mentioned you're an EndoFound warrior, ambassador,
I'll take
EndoFound
both.
ambassador, Endo warrior, EndoFound ambassador. Tell us a little bit about what EndoFound is.
So EndoFound was founded by Dr. Tamar Sechkin, who is an endo excision surgeon with Padma Lakshmi of Top Chef fame. She herself has endometriosis, and she collaborated with Dr. Sechkin over 10 years ago because she said no one knew about this disease. They started, and it was actually EndoFound that I learned so much when I was told I most likely had it too. So that was the website I went to. That was a place where I thought, wow, they're really doing something to raise awareness. And I think because of Padma's tireless efforts to get endometriosis into our normal mainstream vocabulary, it's made such a difference. And so many others have been part of that growth. So what I do as EndoFound is I run Endo TV. I'm a host and executive producer there. It's an educational branch. We have patient stories. We have lawmakers from different states and people on a federal level. We have physicians, researchers talking about what they're doing to help make progress in this disease that affects 1 in 10 with a uterus in this country alone. And that's like a low estimate. So they do a lot in terms of education and advocacy.
Awesome. Yeah, I had the pleasure of attending the fundraising gala this year for EndoFound, and the audience was filled with people experiencing EndoFound and or endometriosis and their loved ones, and it was very empowering for a lot of different reasons. And then I kind of meant to tell you guys this in the beginning when we were chatting offline. I read Padma's book. I don't know what it took me so long to read her memoir because I'm a big fan, big Top Chef fan. There is a section of her book, it's about like 10 or 15 pages, that is required reading for anybody who loves someone who's experiencing endometriosis, or maybe required reading for someone with painful periods that haven't been diagnosed. It was so moving and so poignant and really encapsulated a lot of what people with endometriosis feel. And so Resolve does not endorse books, but Rebecca Flick says pick it up. And I've shared that a lot with people who I want to know about endometriosis. I'm like, if you read this book, pay attention to these 10 or 15 pages. So kudos to her. And we're so grateful that EndoFound exists. I know you guys do really great work, especially with research and advocacy. So thank you for being an ambassador. Let's talk a little bit about someone watching this who maybe hasn't been officially diagnosed. And I know do you ever get diagnosed until they have, surgery, or, what is it? What is the kind of patient experience to kind of get someone to finally say, okay, there's something wrong and we need to do something about it? Like, what kind of questions did you all feel like you asked your healthcare providers to kind of just keep advocating for yourself, as you both talked about?
Yeah, I'll go. I think that the main thing with people with any chronic condition, but specifically with endometriosis, because it's so spontaneous as it relates to pain, like I think that that's the stigma behind it, and the stereotype and misconception is that people think that whenever your cycle comes on, you're experiencing this pain, but sometimes your cycle is not even on and you're still experiencing this type of pain. So when it comes to bedside and patient experience, you really want to be seen and heard. This is one thing to, be another status quo or to be another patient within that office. But for someone to actually take the time to understand not only the symptoms that you're talking about, but also the emotions that you're speaking to it, you have to really understand and have a different type of compassion and empathy to really recognize what this person is going through. Because by the time we have reached your office, we've probably seen about 100 other doctors. And it's really unfortunate, but it's the truth because sometimes we're not seen and heard, and other times there are just not that many people that specialize specifically in this area of expertise because it's not just reproductive, it's a multidisciplinary chronic condition. So you have to really understand how the body works and what that specific individual is in need of, because there is no cookie cutter way to plan out strategically and effectively a plan for that patient until you really understand in totality what they're going through. Because what my story is and what Diana's story is, and this is the beauty of having a community, is that we have common similarities and we also have the diagnosis of endometriosis, but the path that it took for us to get there is totally different. And we just can't have a physician just say, okay, this is one way that it has to be done, and we're going to do it both. We need the TLC and the bedside experience for you to be able to understand that and just make it tailor fit for us.
Diana, follow up on that. I mean, I was like, April is an advocate. You can tell for
Yes,
sure.
yes, she is. I would say that when you get into that room with the doctor, understand that they might not be having the best day, they might be having a busy day. Make sure to take notes of your symptoms and go in there planned. I would write out before my appointments my symptoms that were most pressing and my questions for the doctor, because when I would get in there, I would have like stage fright. I would be so overwhelmed by the examination, by what was going on, that I would forget everything that I was telling up in my head for a few weeks before that appointment. So I would just say to be prepared, treat this like your own, like you're like not a job interview, but almost, because you're interviewing them as much as you are trying to just get answers. So you want to make sure that you trust your provider, that you're comfortable, and that they also can see something with the symptoms. Like when I had sciatic leg pain, I never put it together with my cycle.
Right.
When I felt like or I actually would vomit, I never put it together with my cycle that a week before my period, the leg pain would start and I would get nauseous and couldn't eat anything. It wasn't until after that I was told, oh, that's a really common thing with endometriosis. Like it is, because all I pictured endometriosis, even when I was first diagnosed, was pelvic cramps, right? I had no idea that it could be extra pelvic.
Great advice. Yeah, you kind of want to say, what would you sometimes you have to stop and think when it comes to yourself, like what would you do or what would you tell your best friend? And you'd probably be like, I'll go with you to the appointment and take notes. So tell yourself to take those notes and go, really be present at that appointment, because you're in such a vulnerable position, literally and figuratively, that, yeah, skirts, gown, paper, I love those like kind of memes on social media where everyone folds up their clothes and like covers their bra in the OBGYN office, and you're like, why am I doing this? Like, this is ridiculous. But we all do it. So
Totally.
make sure that notebook is right on top of those like perfectly folded clothes so you can refer to how you'll be feeling. And I think documenting how you feel throughout the month is very helpful as well. April, do you know of any cases? And I know I want to clarify we're not medical professionals, but you have connected with so many people through this. Have you ever come across anybody who was like maybe asymptomatic and just was discovered in other ways?
Yeah, so I have a number of people. Actually, not recently. I've been getting a lot of emails. So I'm like, I think it's like really good that people are going back to the core of things. Like I love social media. It's amazing. I've met great people like Diana. But like to go back to the core and the basics of like email, that has really been a thing, which is why I keep my blog open, because you never know who's really out there searching for information. But well, as it relates to infertility, because later on I found out that I was diagnosed with infertility with having a low AMH. Obviously, well, not obviously, but for me, a product of endometriosis, unfortunately. And a lot of people that have been reaching out to me, it has been because they're in their late 30s and in their early 40s, and now they realize that they have infertility. And for so long, they never had any symptoms. And when they do their workup with the fertility specialist, now they realize that they have either endo or adeno, and they never even knew that any of these things existed. I know for me, when I was on oral contraceptives, it was a band-aid for me, and it masked a lot of things, other things that I had going on. And what I end up realizing from the people that I am encountering and in communication with, most of the time they have another pre-existing condition that took precedence and priority over their body, that it made it a little bit difficult and challenging for physicians to recognize it until it was actually in the forefront. For me, I mean, no one does this, but I was already with endometriosis already. So for my 30th birthday, I went to a fertility specialist, like just to make sure I was okay. But there are things that we can just do with our regular GYN when we go get our annual, just to get regular blood work. I mean, they're already doing blood work anyway. Just add that extra vial for them to do that panel to see, where you stand, just so that you can find out what's happening, because a lot of people do go asymptomatic. And, myself and Diana, we're talking about symptoms now that when you look up endometriosis, you will see these as classic symptoms. But when we were going through this over a decade ago, those wasn't the classic symptoms. So technically we were asymptomatic. We didn't have those type of symptoms, and we were diagnosed with other things.
Right.
So it's just doing like that extra work that's already included within your doctor's visit, and just having those type of candid conversations, because what you may think is asymptomatic can actually be something else that we're just not being mindful of. And because we go through things as women and as individuals, we're just always just strong by nature, that sometimes we think that this is just our body and how it's supposed to function, other than being alarmed and having like a yellow flag, like, hey, okay, maybe this is something that I should be cautious of and try to figure out what's next, if any.
And also,
Yeah.
just to add to April's point about asymptomatic and infertility, but also if you have been recently diagnosed with endometriosis at any stage in your life, I just say go for the AMH test. Go get that
Mm-hmm.
fertility test, because we know, right, statistically know that that endometriosis is a leading cause of infertility. So if you can help yourself, even if you don't know if you want to have kids, but just to know, right? Knowledge is power. Just to know where you stand, to have the option. It's always good to have the options of what you can do with your body and your life.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a good reminder. I think a lot of people that Resolve comes in contact with either find out they have endometriosis because they're trying to conceive or trying to get pregnant. Um, and others have a known endometriosis diagnosis and come to Resolve for support through the family building process. And at the end of the day, you still have a chronic illness that needs attention. Let's talk a little bit of quality of life and um, maybe like the emotional and kind of friendship life, relationship life that you guys experienced when maybe either knowing that you had endometriosis or trying to find out what was going on. What, Diana, what was your quality of life like then? And maybe talk a little bit about any personal relationships that suffered.
I I was really wiped off of my feet. I was always a type A, very career focused person. And the pain just got to the point where it consumed my day. I was functioning, but not really functioning. Like I was still working my hardest. I was achieving, I was doing all the things, but doing it with this like dark cloud of pain and fog. And I felt completely alone in it. At the time, I had a partner who just couldn't understand why I was so healthy one day and the next day was so sick, and it was damaging to our relationship. At the same time, like, cut to being diagnosed with infertility, I started questioning myself as a woman. That was really unnecessary of me. I was like, hey, this was my dream. Now is my whole life plan different? So I went from being this healthy, productive person to all of a sudden being like, wait a minute, I'm identifying as someone who's sick, and this is different, and I feel vulnerable and weak. So I couldn't find that community in my real life. So I sought it out in a virtual way. And I was able to find that online. And I started talking to people who were diagnosed, who had already been through a lot of what I was going through. And I was like, oh, wait a minute, I don't have to walk this by myself. I can have someone that is holding my hand. And it was actually people online that were saying to me, you actually have a really important symptom here. When I started having kidney symptoms, I had no idea that endometriosis could go to the kidneys. It was actually one of my friends in the endo community who flagged it for me and said, you need to go see an endosurgeon. You need to go get seen quickly.
Wow.
Because I kept being told that, your UTIs are coming up clean. You're just tired. You're just tired. Maybe you lifted something and that's why your like flank pain area hurts. And thank God I listened to her, because I was in surgery within a couple of weeks or actually, no, I was in surgery in less than a couple of weeks, emergency surgery. And I was told I was 2 weeks away for having kidney failure. So I thank that friend all the time for being able to advocate for me when I couldn't and didn't have the know-how.
That's amazing.
I love
April,
that.
talk to me a little bit about your quality of life and personal relationships.
Yeah, so actually the reason why I created Instagram back when that, like, I had this whole thing like I'm never going to show my face. I'm just creating these memes, these emojis, and that's it, because it was my way of expressing myself and getting it out. because I was so self-conscious about myself. I was very depressed because I didn't know how to navigate, everything that I know now because everything was so new. There wasn't as many resources out there as they are now. So I was navigating it by myself. I used to drive 2.5 hours to Connecticut to an endometriosis support group because at the time there wasn't a New York based support group. I'm thankful for them because they still are my friends today, now a decade later. And it meant so much to me to just be around like minded people.
Yeah.
My friends, thankfully, growing up, had an understanding but didn't really get it because they didn't have a chronic condition, but they just felt bad and didn't know what to do. So I missed a lot of outings. And at this point, I just didn't even want to be bothered. But as I got older and I started being around the community and having that support, it allowed me to give myself grace. I didn't know that it was grace at that time, but to give myself grace and to be honest. Back then, I used to lie and be like, oh, I have to do something else. And I was really laid in my bed. But it taught me how to be honest and more open about my condition. And that's what helped me get out of the depression that I was in as it related to it. Social media ended up being an outlet for me. Like there's nothing that I don't talk about at this point. And it's therapy for me. And my therapist has been helpful in allowing me to recognize that, like, I'm thankful that I'm in a space to be able to advocate, but I'm also cleansing myself as well, with the information and the knowledge that I have, or even just thoughts. Like the other day, I was like, this endo flare is crazy, y'all. And it was so many people that commented, like, me too. It's just really just being able to have that support and to not feel like you're alone. But it took me a while to finally get to this point of understanding that there are people out here. Like when you look at it and you read it, like you said, Rebecca, it's like 1 out of 10. I'm like, where's the other person?
Yeah.
Where's the other person? And I wanted to find that so desperately because I didn't want to feel crazy. I didn't want to feel like I was going through this journey by myself. So it's definitely a journey. You can definitely find your tribe as long as you're open to it.
Yeah.
That's such a good statement. Like you can find people, but you have to be willing to give a little bit. Like you can't assume that someone knows that you're going through something. So, but it is hard to talk about. It's very intimate. It's, I remember talking to a friend, like there's a group of people that in my life are coming upon teenage daughters. And I was like, you have to talk to them about their period. They're like, what? I'm like, because your normal could not be their normal. And, we have to start that dialogue so much younger so people know what's normal. And this whole, well, I was told at a very young age, well, that's just your period. And I was like, now I'm thinking like, what does that mean? That's just mine. So, I think I see a lot of being in this space for a very long time. I'm very hopeful at the talk around period talk and menstrual health and that the generations that have come after me are doing. So thank you both.
Can I just add one more thing, Rebecca, about
Yeah.
this? Like for anybody that's watching this, because a lot of people also reach out to me like, I can't do what you do. And I'm like, I'm not asking you to do what I do. I'm thankful that I'm graced for this assignment, but you have an assignment also. I think when people see myself and Diana out in the forefront, and you also, Rebecca, for being an amazing face, and voice for Resolve, it's like, oh my gosh, like how do these people do it? How do they advocate? How do they be that voice? You can talk to your niece,
Yeah.
your cousin, your close friends, like you're advocating within your own right. There's never no wrong or right rhyme or reason for advocating. It's whoever, whatever your community is, that's who you're supposed to talk to and educate and have these type of conversations. And that's the thing, having a conversation is education. So something just as simple as small as that is being able to help someone else because you never know what that other person is going through.
Absolutely. Sharing is very powerful.
Yeah.
Let's end on a positive note, if we can. What is one wish you each have for the next person who faces endometriosis? Diana?
Well, I mean, the easy thing to say would be a cure, right? And we are all hoping for that. But aside from that, to feel listened to encounter compassion, and to just know that it's not in their head, and that they are sick, and they don't have to identify as sick. They're still strong and resilient human beings, but to just use April's word of have grace with themselves. But my wish for them would to be greeted with compassion.
April?
That was heavy. In a good way. It made me think. But I'm just gonna stick to the one word that initially came to me, and that's peace. And I say that because I went through personally so much turmoil within my heart and within my mind, just trying to find the right answers with endometriosis. And I was a maniac when I was diagnosed with infertility. It was bad. Like, I can honestly say it was so bad because I felt like I had finally like mastered and understood endometriosis, that in my mind, I thought that I was ready for anything else that could come, but my heart wasn't. Because my goal is to be a mom, and I, do believe that one day I will be able to become a mom. But peace, like, it's really important to have that no matter which phase of the journey you're in. And even if that means taking a day and not doing nothing, something that you would actually enjoy to do that's not even related to anything that has to do with your diagnosis or a chronic condition is good, because it gives you that time to recalibrate and get ready for that next part of the journey. And I think that it makes it challenging when you're in it, because I'm still in it myself, but there's also like so much positive joy in a pause. And I didn't realize it until I actually took that time for myself to actually pause and recognize how important it was for me, because I need to be a whole me before I can be a whole mom for anyone else, or an advocate for anyone else as it relates to anything within the fertility and endometriosis community. So my one word is peace.
Awesome. Well, my wish for anybody watching is that they get to meet you too, whether it's online or in person, and also just to find someone that they can share something with. That's how we all found each other, and that's how we continue to find patient advocates, whether it's in the endometriosis community or in the infertility community. I thank you both for giving us your time to be here. I really, really appreciate it. I think everyone who's tuning in, share this with someone that you think might benefit from understanding a little bit more about this topic. And a special thank you to our head of the table sponsor, Sumitomo Pharma, for their support. And keep watching Resolve on YouTube for more kitchen table conversation episodes. Thank you.